For 20 years, a killer went to church every Sunday. He coached Little League. He shook hands with neighbors. He sat at dinner tables and said grace. And for 20 years, no one, not the police, not the FBI, not anyone in the community, had any idea. But a DNA sample sitting quietly in an evidence lab knew the truth the whole time. This is the story of two 17-year-old girls who vanished on a birthday night in Alabama, of a killer who lived among the people who grieved his victims, and of the technology that finally brought him down, 2 decades too late for justice but not too late for answers. It was the summer of 1999. America was riding the longest economic boom in its history. The Backstreet Boys were on every radio. Bill Clinton was in the White House. And in Dothan, Alabama, a small city of 60,000 people tucked into the corner where Alabama meets Florida and Georgia, the summer felt exactly the way summers are supposed to feel when you are 17 years old. JB Beasley was born on July 31, 1982, which meant that tonight, the last night of July, was her birthday. She was exactly the kind of kid parents never had to worry about. Honor roll, cheerleader, junior honor society. Her mother, Cheryl Bergen, called her a beautiful gift. JB had a plan for her life, and tonight was supposed to be part of it. A birthday party, a night out with her best friend, the kind of memory you carry for decades. That best friend was Tracy Hollett. The two girls had been inseparable since middle school. If JB was there, Tracy was there. It was that simple. Around 10 o'clock that night, JB and Tracy climbed into JB's black Mazda 929 and headed north out of Dothan toward Headland, about 10 miles away, where the party was being held. Somewhere along the way, they made a wrong turn, then another. Before they knew it, they were in Ozark, a town more than 20 miles in the wrong direction. Lost and a little anxious, the two girls pulled into the Big Little convenience store and Chevron station at 763 East Broad Street. The store had closed at 11, but they got lucky. A woman named Marilyn Merritt and her daughter had stopped to grab sodas. JB and Tracy got out of the car and asked for directions back to Highway 231. Merritt gave them clear directions. She would later remember that JB's car was spotless. The girls were calm and clean. There was nothing alarming in their faces. Just two teenagers trying to find their way home. At the pay phone on the corner of the store's front wall, Tracy picked up the receiver and called her mother, Carol Roberts. Carol answered. Tracy's voice was normal, a little sheepish about getting lost, but fine. She said they had directions now and were heading home. The last thing Tracy said before she hung up was, "Mom, I love you. Be home soon." Marilyn Merritt stood in the parking lot and watched the black Mazda pull out, turn right, and disappear into the dark Alabama night. That was the last time anyone who loved them saw JB Beasley and Tracy Hollett alive. There was one other thing in that parking lot that no one noticed at the time. The security camera inside the store had captured a blurry image. A small white pickup truck parked at the gas pump at the exact moment Tracy was on the phone. The pump recorded no transaction. No one recognized the truck. No one saw the driver. For years, that blurry image would be one of the most haunting unanswered questions in the entire case. When the girls didn't come home that night, their families reported them missing the next morning. That same morning, a black Mazda 929 was found parked on Herring Avenue in Ozark, less than a mile from the pay phone Tracy had used the night before. Ozark police responded. On the surface, the car looked like nothing. No damage. No sign of a crash or a struggle. Just a car on the side of the road. But the details told a different story if you looked closely enough. The car was covered in mud. The gas tank was nearly empty. The driver's side window was rolled down a few inches. The doors were unlocked. JB's driver's license was sitting on the dashboard. Both girls' wallets were still inside, along with cash, jewelry, and credit cards, all untouched. The only thing missing was JB's keychain. A small chain with white and black blocks spelling out 3 words. Hard to get. Ozark police determined the car had Dothan plates and called Dothan investigators. A Dothan officer came out with the intention of having the car towed. The vehicle had been sitting there since 8 in the morning. 6 hours passed. No one opened the trunk. It wasn't until nearly 2 in the afternoon, while waiting for the tow truck, that the investigator discovered the trunk could be opened from inside the car without a key. He pulled the lever. JB Beasley and Tracy Hollett were inside. Each had a single 9mm gunshot wound to the head. They were still fully clothed, but their bodies told a story. Tracy had scratches on her arm. Briars were stuck to her pants. Her brand new New Balance shoes, bought just the week before, were caked in mud. Both girls' pant legs were wet from the knee down. Wherever they had been taken before they were killed, it was somewhere outside. Wet ground. Tall grass. Somewhere in the dark. From the position of the bodies, investigators could tell Tracy had been placed in the trunk first, JB placed after her. A 9mm shell casing rested on Tracy's leg. This was not the crime scene. This was a dump site. Whatever had happened to JB and Tracy had happened somewhere else. Someone had driven their own car to Herring Avenue and left it there for someone else to find. Robbery was ruled out immediately. Cash, jewelry, and credit cards were all untouched. This was not about money. This was something far worse. More than 2 months after the bodies were found, the Alabama State Crime Lab announced a discovery that changed everything. Semen had been found on JB Beasley, on her bra, her panties, and her skin. An unidentified palm print had also been lifted from the inside of the trunk lid. District Attorney David Emery stated it plainly. This was a sexual crime. Find the man who left that semen and you find the killer. That theory was correct. But finding him would take 20 more years. Dothan was devastated. Not the kind of shock that fades in a week. The kind that settles into a community and refuses to leave. 2 17-year-old girls in the trunk of a car on a birthday night. People walked past each other on the street and wondered who among them could have done it. Exactly 1 month after the bodies were discovered, a man walked into the police station on his own. On September 1, 1999, Johnny William Barentine, 28 years old, a part-time mechanic who lived less than a mile from Herring Avenue, told officers he knew something about the case. The interrogation lasted 4 hours and was fully recorded. During those 4 hours, Barentine told 6 different versions of what he claimed to have seen. In the first version, he had watched a black truck speed away from Herring Avenue that night. In the next, he had given a ride to a tattooed stranger near the Big Little store. In his final and most detailed version, the tattooed stranger had approached the girl's car in the parking lot, and Barentine had followed them to Herring Avenue, where he heard 2 gunshots. Police arrested Barentine immediately. The press covered it like a solved case. The community exhaled, but the problems appeared fast. In all 6 versions of his story, Barentine never once mentioned anything sexual, even though the physical evidence made clear that a sexual act had occurred. The neighbor he identified had a solid alibi for the entire night, and when the DNA results came back, they matched neither Barentine nor the neighbor. Barentine appeared before a grand jury and admitted the truth. He had made up every word of it. He had seen nothing. He knew nothing. He had fabricated the entire story to collect the reward money. The grand jury declined to indict him. He walked free, and the investigation was now worse than square one, because police had spent months chasing a lie while the real killer remained invisible. Other leads came and went. A man from Michigan who had been near Herring Avenue the night of July 31st couldn't account for several hours and left town days after the bodies were found. Investigators flew to Michigan 3 separate times to question him. His DNA didn't match. A man from Mississippi who had been staying in Ozark around the time of the crime was brought in and tested. His DNA didn't match either. The white pickup truck from the security camera, blurry footage, unreadable license plate, was never identified. Its driver was never found. Every lead ended the same way. A name, a theory, a DNA swab, and then silence. The semen sample remained the only piece of evidence with any value. But the man who left it had no criminal record. His DNA was not in any database. Each year, investigators checked it against an expanding pool of profiles. Each year, it came back with no match. The 2000s arrived. Then the 2010s. Dothan kept living. New neighborhoods were built. Children born after 1999 grew up knowing JB and Tracy only as names adults mentioned in a certain tone of voice. Life moved forward for almost everyone. But not for Carol Roberts. Not for Cheryl Bergen. For these two mothers, time didn't pass the way it does for everyone else. It accumulated. Every July 31st, they lived that night again. The payphone, the directions, the black Mazda turning right into the dark. The last words. Mom, I love you. Be home soon. The case file sat open at the Ozark Police Department. Officially active. Practically frozen. And somewhere in the Wiregrass region of Alabama, the man who killed their daughters was living a completely normal life. 20 years of silence. In April 2018, the entire country stopped to watch an arrest in California. Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, had committed at least 13 murders and more than 50 sexual assaults across California during the 1970s and 1980s. He had evaded investigators for more than 40 years. And then, in 2018, he was caught, thanks to a technique that had never been used in American criminal justice before, genetic genealogy. Here is how it works. Traditional DNA databases like the FBI's CODI system only contain samples from people who have been arrested or convicted of crimes. If your killer has never been arrested, his DNA simply doesn't exist in that system. You can check it 1,000 times and get the same answer. No match. Genetic genealogy takes a completely different approach. Instead of looking for the killer directly, investigators upload the crime scene DNA to public ancestry databases, sites where millions of ordinary people have voluntarily shared their DNA to research their family histories. The DNA doesn't need to be a perfect match to anyone in the database. It just needs to be close enough to identify distant relatives, a third cousin, a second cousin, anyone who shares a segment of DNA with the unknown suspect. From those partial matches, forensic genealogists build family trees. They work backward through generations, forward through branches, ruling people out by age, sex, geography, and circumstance, narrowing a tree of thousands down to a handful of names. Then down to one. It doesn't search for the killer. It searches for his family, and then it finds him. Ozark Police Chief Mosley Walker had followed the Golden State Killer case with the kind of attention that comes from having an unsolved case sitting in your own office. He had a DNA sample from 1999. Two families who had been waiting 20 years. And now proof that technology existed to do what 2 decades of investigation could not. He contacted Parabon Nanolabs and asked them to run the 1999 crime scene DNA. Find the matching families. Build the tree. Narrow it down. They did. The results came back pointing to a cluster of Alabama families whose DNA was similar enough to the crime scene sample to indicate a biological connection. Walker read through the list, and then he stopped at one name, a name he recognized from his own school days growing up in this community. Coley McCraney. McCraney was 45 years old, born and raised in the Dothan, Ozark area, a long-haul truck driver by trade, and a pastor at a local church. He had a wife named Jeanette, 2 children, and a face people recognized around town. The kind of man you nod to at the gas station, chat with about football, see in the pew a few rows over on Sunday morning. No criminal record. No history with police. No reason, in 20 years, for anyone to connect his name to the trunk of a black Mazda on Herring Avenue. Walker did not approach McCraney as a suspect. That would have been the wrong move. A suspect calls a lawyer. A suspect disappears. Instead, Walker invited McCraney to the station for a conversation. One local man to another, people who had known each other since they were kids. He told McCraney directly, "You are not a suspect, but we need your DNA to help identify who we are really looking for." Jeanette McCraney came with her husband. She had no reason to be worried. She encouraged Coley to cooperate. Of course he should help. McCraney sat calmly while an officer swabbed the inside of his cheek, completely unaware that the family tree Parabon had already built from the crime scene DNA had pointed directly at him before he ever walked through the door. The results came back with no ambiguity. Coley McCraney's DNA was an exact match to the semen collected from JB Beasley on August 1, 1999. When investigators confronted him with the results, McCraney denied everything. He said he did not know JB Beasley or Tracy Hollett. Said he had no connection to the girls. Said he was not in Ozark on the night of July 31, 1999. On March 15, 2019, Nearly 20 years after the night JB and Tracy disappeared into the dark, Coley McCraney was arrested on multiple counts of capital murder and rape. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. Dothan and Ozark were stunned. Not because the case had been solved. Not because DNA technology had succeeded where 2 decades of investigation had failed. The shock came from the name itself. Coley McCraney. Pastor. A father. A man who had lived among the people mourning his victims for 20 years. Going to work, going to church, watching his children grow up, while Carol Roberts and Cheryl Bergen sat at home waiting for answers. The realization settled over the community slowly, like something cold. The killer had been here the whole time. The trial was scheduled to begin in 2020. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and everything stalled. It wasn't until April 2023, 24 years after the night JB and Tracy were killed, that the trial officially opened in Dale County, with Judge William Fillmore presiding. Coley McCraney, now 49 years old, sat at the defense table facing 4 counts of capital murder and 1 count of rape. Carol Roberts and Cheryl Bergen sat in the row reserved for victims' families. They had waited long enough. The trial lasted 8 days. McCraney made the decision to take the stand himself, a significant risk, because once a defendant testifies, they face full cross-examination with no protection. And what McCraney said on the stand was a complete reversal of everything he had told police in 2019. Gone was the total denial. Gone was the claim he had never met the girls. Now he told an entirely different story. He said he had met JB at a shopping mall in Dothan several months before the crime. She had introduced herself as Jennifer. They exchanged numbers, stayed in contact, and arranged to meet in Ozark on July 31st. He claimed his truck had broken down nearby that night due to a bad alternator. He saw JB and Tracy at the payphone by coincidence, approached them, and the girls offered to drive him to his truck. In the cab of his truck, he said he and JB had consensual sex. Afterward, he said the girls dropped him home around 12:45 in the morning, and he knew nothing more about what happened to them. As for why he had spent 4 years completely denying ever knowing the girls, he said he was afraid his wife would find out about the affair. The prosecution took his story apart piece by piece. There was no evidence, no texts, no calls, no witnesses, to support the claim that JB and McCraney had ever been in contact before July 31st. Marilyn Merritt, the woman who had spoken with the girls in the parking lot that night, testified clearly. JB and Tracy were simply lost and trying to find their way home. There was no sign of a planned meeting, no excitement, no anticipation. And Tracy's call to her mother at 11:35 confirmed it. They were heading home, not to a rendezvous. The prosecution's reconstruction, built on physical and forensic evidence, told a very different story. After leaving the Big Little store, McCraney intercepted the girls at gunpoint. He forced them to accompany him somewhere outside in the dark, somewhere with wet grass and brush, which explained the mud on their shoes, the briars on Tracy's pants, and the wetness soaked into their pant legs from the knee down. He raped JB. Then he shot both girls with a 9mm handgun, placed their bodies in the trunk of JB's own car, drove to Herring Avenue, and left it there. But the most devastating testimony in the entire trial did not come from a forensic expert or an investigator. It came from Jeanette McCraney, the wife who had sat beside her husband in 2019 and encouraged him to give his DNA to the police. The woman who had no reason to suspect anything. She took the stand and told the jury that Coley McCraney had gone out on the night of July 31st, 1999, and had been gone for a period of time he never satisfactorily explained. Not then. Not in the 20 years that followed. The woman who had unknowingly helped police catch her husband was now testifying against him in a murder trial. If there was a single moment in this case that captured the full weight of everything, the betrayal, the years of silence, the ordinary life built on top of an unthinkable act, it was that one. On April 25, 2023, after 8 days of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. They came back the next day. Guilty. On all 4 counts. The murder of JB Beasley during the commission of rape. The murder of Tracy Hollett during the same criminal event. The murder of both victims as part of the same course of conduct. And the use of JB's own Mazda 929 as part of the crime. a provision under Alabama law that elevates an offense to capital murder. The following day, the jury returned again to decide the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was not the death penalty the prosecution had originally sought. But it meant this: Coley McCraney, 49 years old, would never walk out of a prison gate for the rest of his life. In the courtroom when the verdict was read, Carol Roberts couldn't speak. She sat still for several minutes. She later said, "I'm stunned. We waited 24 years and finally someone is being held accountable." Cheryl Bergen, JB's mother, heard the word guilty and leaned forward and broke down in tears. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall, who personally prosecuted the case, said, "We lost two precious girls who never had the chance to grow up and experience life." He acknowledged openly that no verdict brings complete closure. Nothing could. But it answered the question these two women had carried for nearly a quarter of a century. Coley McCraney is currently serving his sentence at William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. In a phone interview from prison, he continued to proclaim his innocence. The case of JB Beasley and Tracy Hollett was among the first in the United States to prove that genetic genealogy could solve a cold case under conditions where every traditional method had failed. No criminal record, no reliable witnesses, no physical evidence except a single DNA sample stored in a lab for 2 decades. After McCraney's conviction, hundreds of cold cases across America were reopened using the same approach. Families who had spent years without answers began receiving phone calls they no longer believed would ever come. One DNA sample, 20 years, and 2 mothers who never stopped waiting. JB Beasley would have turned 41 in 2023, the same year the verdict came in. Tracy Hollett would have been the same age. We don't know what their lives would have looked like. We don't know what they would have become, who they would have loved, what they would have built. We only know who they were on July 31, 1999. 2 best friends, lost on a birthday night, trying to find their way home. There are things this case asks all of us to consider. Tell someone exactly where you are going, not just the general area, but the specific address, the host's name, and the time you expect to be home. If the plans change, call. Tracy called her mother from that payphone. It was the right instinct. Make sure the people who love you always have a thread to follow. If you are ever lost and need to stop the car at night, stay inside it. Lock the doors. Make your call from there. Do not get out to ask directions from strangers if you can avoid it. And remember what this case makes clear about the nature of danger. It does not announce itself. It does not look like a monster. It looks like a neighbor, a familiar face, someone you may have spoken to 100 times without suspicion. That is not a reason to live in fear. It is a reason to stay alert, trust what your instincts are telling you, and never dismiss a feeling that something is wrong. 2 families waited 24 years for this answer. A DNA sample in an evidence locker held the truth the whole time. If you found this story worth knowing, please share it, because every share might be what helps someone out there make a safer choice tonight. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.